Well, this slide is confirmation that you've shown up in the right course. This is the history of war, which looks at everything from cavemen to Al Qaeda and beyond, but is not so much a survey of everything that has happened in military history, which would be insane, um, but rather a course on how to think about war and also to think how to think about history itself, because for many of you, this may well be the only college history course you'll ever take. This may also be the first online course you've taken as well. And it's certainly the first online course you've taken with me. So I want to talk for a bit about how the course is designed. I will leave you to read the syllabus on your own, but for the love of Mike, read it and always keep it handy. So, okay, the course is asynchronous, and a synchronous course would be one in which you were all doing the same thing at the same time. Like you would all be logging in for a Zoom meeting, for example. But that's practical only with a limited class size. We have currently over 120 students enrolled for this course, and so the presentations are obviously recorded, and you can watch them at whatever time you find is convenient, and that's what makes it asynchronous. Each week, we'll focus on a particular subject organized into modules. Each module consists first of a summary of the requirements, particularly of the readings for that week. Then comes the lecture for that week, which takes the form of several recordings of about 20 to 30 minutes each. If this were a face-to-face course, we'd be meeting twice a week for 80 minutes each time, for a total of 160 minutes. I'll aim for about 150 minutes, that is to say 2.5 hours of recorded presentations in all for any given week. I won't go over 160. Some of the recordings are informal, that is to say, I'll speak without notes. But in most cases, I'll be reading from a prepared script, like I am now. Visually, this is less than ideal because you'll mostly see me looking at the script rather than looking directly at you. However, I discovered that this was the best way to do things because it greatly reduces the number of vocalized pauses, and then stopping to sort of, collect your thoughts and so on. These kinds of things aren't usually annoying in a classroom setting where you're used to people using vocalized pauses when they talk and stopping to collect their thoughts. In a face-to-face setting, it's not annoying. In a recording, though, it can get real annoying real fast. So because these things become so noticeable and so annoying in a recorded presentation, I've opted to work from a script. The presentations are graphics intensive. That is to say, I use illustrations liberally and text only sparingly. I want you to be listening to me, not copying down what's written on a PowerPoint slide. But I try hard to make the main points obvious. And then the rest of what I'll be saying is intended to sort of illustrate what I mean by the main point, to make it more vivid, to bring it across more clearly. There will usually be a computer-generated transcript available. It isn't perfect, but you may find it helpful, particularly if English is a second language for you. One other thing about these illustrations, when I first designed the course last year, I spent hours, I mean, as many as 10 hours a day, looking for the right illustration to illustrate what it was that I was trying to convey. And so these illustrations aren't just there in a higgledy-piggledy kind of fashion. they're integral to the course. So that's another reason why I've made things graphics intensive in that way. It's part of the pedagogy of the course. Now, at the end of each module, there will be a low stakes quiz, typically 10 points, which is when you get done, each 10-point quiz is worth about 1% of your total grade. And these are intended, as it says there, mainly to save yourself from yourself in terms of reducing the human tendency to procrastinate. And by the way, you probably procrastinate now, and you might think, well, when I'm a real adult, I won't procrastinate anymore. Forget it. I'm turning 62 in October, and I still procrastinate. It's still it can be a lifelong struggle, but you work on procrastinating less now, and it will save you a lot of trouble down the line. So, finally, several modules, but not all, will have discussions or subject topics for discussion, usually based upon a video or an article. And I've divided the class into 24 groups of 5 or 6 students each. And you'll be asked to write a comment on the discussion topic and then respond to somebody else's comment. And although strictly speaking, this isn't a group project in the sense that you'll be graded individually, not as a group, you'll learn more and possibly earn a better grade if your group actually capitalizes on the chance to talk about the topic. Now, I know what you're probably thinking about group projects. Or maybe you think this about group projects. This is kind of what I think about group projects. But you might think about it more like this, as a real honest to goodness conversation. And so take time to get to know each other as people. And in fact, the way I frame some of the questions is designed to more or less force you to do this, to get to know one another as people. And although this course is online, many of you will be on campus. And so why not take that opportunity to get together, actually get together over a beer, if you're old enough, or a soft drink, or other tasty beverage if you're not. By the way, this it turns out this illustration that I'm using is of people drinking and commenting upon non-alcoholic beer. So they're not drinking alcohol either. So, but the operative point is that the more comfortable you are with each other, the more effort you're likely to put into the discussions, and the more you'll learn from them. Now, there are 4 books required for the course. The first of these, World History of Warfare, is a textbook. In fact, it's one of the first that was published that viewed military history in global perspective rather than concentrating on the European experience, starting with the ancient Greeks, then coming down to World War II and that kind of thing. Now, candidly, somewhat better world military history textbooks are available now, but the least expensive of these is $80, and it goes up from there. This book goes for $30 if you buy it from Amazon, and buy a new copy from Amazon, and you can get a used copy online for as little as $4. I'm not making this up. Next is Carnage and Culture by Victor Davis Hanson. And you may have encountered him if you watch Fox News in particular, because over the years he's become less of a historian now and more of a political commentator. And he's increasingly sort of hard right in his in his opinions, but he's a good historian and a very intelligent person. And we're reading Carnage and Culture for a reason, which I will now get into. Um, it is emphatically not a textbook. A textbook more or less just tries to give you the facts. Carnage and Culture, on the other hand, is highly opinionated. And frankly, I don't agree with some of Hanson's opinions, but that doesn't matter. History as an academic field is not an oracle speaking about the past. It's really a dialogue consisting mainly, though not exclusively, of books and articles that build upon one another or argue with each other. And some military historians find Hanson's thesis, his basic argument, which I'll talk about later, persuasive. Others don't. But Carnage and Culture is intelligently argued. And if you disagree with it, you'd better have a good counter argument. And in fact, Carnage and Culture quickly provoked a book that strongly disagreed with it, a very good book in its own right. And that's one of the ways by which history advances as a field of scholarship, by constructive disagreement. Another way, before we move on, by which history advances is to look at a given subject more expansively. To give one example, for thousands of years, history focused mainly on important leaders and overwhelmingly on men. Then we got interested in the experience of ordinary people. That's what's called social history. And in the past 50 years or so, have learned to focus on women. That's a women's history, frequently taught from a feminist perspective. And we're not talking about, women that were important leaders like Cleopatra or Catherine the Great, who merely happened to be female, but rather the experience of all women, most of whom have lived and died in societies dominated by men. And so their experience in that respect needs to be contextualized within a frame of a male-dominated society. To give you another example, for thousands of years, military history was more or less what you would expect. It was concerned with great commanders, great battles, new weapons technologies, and so on. But in recent decades, military historians have looked at their own field much more broadly. And this gets us to The Code of the Warrior by Shannon French, who is actually a philosopher by training. And this book examines military history from an unusual angle. It's based upon an elective course that Professor French taught when she was a professor at the U.S. Naval Academy, where it was wildly popular with the hundreds of midshipmen who took it. And this course, The History of War, will draw upon it extensively, and really extensively. So I'm not going to go into it more right now. And finally, there's this book, From Dictatorship to Democracy by Gene Sharp. It's freely available on the internet, and incidentally on this on Carmen for this course, freely available on the internet as a PDF, and that's intentional because Sharp, who until his death was perhaps the world's foremost scholar on nonviolent resistance, wrote it as a practical guide for activists seeking to topple a dictatorship. And his concepts and methods have worked successfully on a number of occasions. For example, in toppling the Serbian strongman Slobodan Milosevic from power in 2000. Now, you might think that because it doesn't employ violent force, nonviolent resistance, by definition, doesn't fit within the subject of military history. Obviously, I disagree, or I wouldn't have signed this book. Nonviolent resistance is a brilliant answer to a seemingly intractable strategic problem. How do you defeat an adversary when the adversary has all the guns? And an understanding of nonviolent resistance can help us better understand insurgencies. These are internal wars that do use violence, which unfortunately is still most insurgencies. Comparatively few are nonviolent insurgencies as yet. And I'll ask you to read a few articles and documents and to watch some videos. But these four books are the ones with which we'll be chiefly concerned. And now, with that, we can turn to our first major topic, which is nothing less than the nature of war itself.